Hey guys, my name is Eric. I've been learning Japanese for about 2 months now, and there's a lot of videos out there where really accomplished, fluent Japanese speakers take you through the process of how they learn Japanese and their tips and tricks. But I feel like there's just so many things that gets lost in the dust, specifically how to learn Japanese as a beginner. And it's understandable, right? Because they're so far down the road that they've taken certain things for granted, and they've just accepted certain things as like, yeah, this is just how you do it. Whereas for a brand new Japanese learner like me, I was struggling to find answers to a lot of like common questions. Like, okay, ANKI is recommended a lot, but how do you use ANKI, right? And I'll take you through that. So that's why I wanted to make this video, and I also wanted to share a Word document, Japanese learning resources by Eric-san, which is just a Japanese name. So really quick, and take a look at the Google Doc in your own time. I'll leave you in the description, but just covers hiragana, katakana, kanji, immersion content, how to learn Japanese YouTube guides, online resources, Anki, and of course, like, there's a lot more to this, but this is the things that I've kind of worked through and I found was helpful, or has helped me. Yeah. Okay, so let's just get straight into my experience in language acquisition. So it'll be this Google Notes page. And the reason why I want to talk about this and what I think I can bring to the conversation of learning Japanese is there's a lot of creators that talk about, like science-based, different methods of learning Japanese, whether that be the immersion method. I forgot who, came up with it, but there's a lot of like research that goes with it. And then there's like a few other methods. I'm personally learning through the immersion method, although that's not really what I want to talk about today. This video is mainly for those of you who are wanting to learn Japanese and have been doing a lot of research. I wanted to make a video talking about my own experience and how I think about language acquisition. And this is not going to apply to everybody, but this is how this is the method that I found worked best for me, and it made the most sense to me. And of course, if you're interested in learning Japanese through like the immersion method or whatever other method, there's tons of videos out there with detailed explanations on what it is, how to do it, and they'll probably give you way better information if you're just wanting to learn more about different specific methods. But for this, it's going to be like a big picture theory on pillars of language acquisition. For me, and in my Japanese learning journey, immersion is the biggest pillar. I see it as like, you're planting a seed and you're nurturing it, and then you're letting it grow to its fullest potential. And immersion does all of it. It introduces you to new words, which is like the seed in the kind of plant analogy. Repetition and exposure, which would be the water and nutrients to grow that seed. Shadowing output, which is like a growth check or like a progress check to see where you are in your journey and what you need to do later and after. Of course, known words. You can't immerse if you don't know a single word. And the more words you know, the more things, the higher level content you can consume and understand. And it's just important. Daily conversation output. There's not really much to say. Reading, of course, repetition, exposure, and it opens new doors in terms of what content you can immerse in. Really helpful. And then writing, speaking is just output, right? Depending on your personal goals, these will have varying levels of importance, but they're just forms of output. And then grammar. You can't speak a language without knowing the grammar, or else it won't make sense. But the important thing is more of like, why do I categorize these in these sections, right? Like there's spaces in between. Everything here is input. This is output, and this is like the technicalities of a certain language. And that's kind of how I look at Japanese. It's just output versus input, and grammar ties it all together pretty much. And everything I do to work on my Japanese will be in a form of, improving my input which would be like maybe like learning new words, so I can, watch more high level content. I don't want to watch like things made for kids all day. And then writing and speaking is more experience of like using words, repetition, and these are and ultimately these are my goals, is to be able to speak and write and maybe live in Japan with no issues. Okay, and the next section would be how your brain processes words. And I'll go through a little bit about how I view, how I think my brain learns new things in general, but specifically I will tailor it to learning Japanese. So, for starters, you ask someone, how do you think your brain processes and learns words? And probably break it down into these 3 categories, right? How they look, the kanji, being able to read, what they sound like, which is pronunciation, and then what they mean, definition. If you have all these 3 things, then you probably know that word, right? Not probably, you definitely know that. If you know how they look, you know what they sound like, and if you know what they mean, then you know that word, right? But I think when it comes to learning Japanese, and perhaps learning in general, I think it is a little bit more complicated than that. And that's what this is. So I've put together a small little thing illustrating through visuals how I process and I understand language. And I come from an artist and design background, which is why like this I think makes the most sense to me, and it might make sense to you. Give it a try. Let me know. But for example, let's just take an example word of ski, which is very common, and I'm pretty sure most of you guys watching the video have experienced some sort of experience, connection with like hearing or knowing what ski means, right? Whether you've seen it in an anime, manga, drama, whatever. So ski, right? Like what they look, this is what it looks like, this is what it sounds like, and what it means. Most of you guys watching, I would probably say know what they sound like and what they mean, but you don't know what they look like. And that will be the case for a lot of words when you start learning Japanese. But I would like to introduce the concept of just the concept of a word. In that there's a lot of times where when you're introduced to a new word while watching anime or something, maybe you know like most of the words in the sentence and you know what they mean, but there's one word that you don't quite know and you just hear, right? And in this short amount of time, there's no room to like really process that kind of word that you don't know. But your brain can probably come up with a very general and vague meaning and a very general, vague understanding of what that word is. So something like this, right? Where like your brain will create a space in your head specifically for this concept of a word, because you haven't learned it yet, right? You kind of get what it means, but you don't know what it means. So it's still very conceptual. And how I illustrate it is just like, maybe you could think of it as like an outline, more of like a stencil that your brain is creating for you to follow, right? And there's meaning, pronunciation, shape. You don't know what it means. You kind of know the pronunciation, but you haven't really heard it multiple times yet. And the shape, which most people, when you're experiencing a new word, unless you're reading it, then this wouldn't really apply for a concept. Or you can even like blur it to like visualize what the concept of a word is. But yeah, and then like once your brain creates a concept, the more times you're like exposed to the word, the more research you do, your mind starts to like fill in the gaps, right? Like it's meaning in an outline, but once you like look it up and you're exposed to it a few times, then you've learned what the meaning of a word is, and then you can like block it in, for example. And that's just like concept versus learning a word. Then earlier I mentioned, right, you guys probably know what ski sounds like and what it means, but you've never seen it before. If you're like a beginner learning Japanese for the first time and you've just learned like hiragana and katakana, I would propose a different way of viewing this, right? Instead of looking at this concept and how the concept relates to the three aspects of learning a word, the three pillars of learning a word, you can maybe think of it like this, where what they sound like, what a word sounds like, and what a word means can be leveraged to help you remember how a word looks and learn how a word looks. And how I visualize this is just, in the first example, an individual pillar of a word can only relate to the concept if you're viewing it like this. And if you're, for example, like maybe ski is a word that you just have never seen before, you don't know what it is, but you want to learn it because you want to learn Japanese, then how you would do it is, well, you would try and find out what it sounds like. Then you would look up the definition of it, and then you would start to form these connections, right? But if you already know what it sounds like and what it means, there's more things that you can latch these connections to. And that's how I leverage, what it sounds like and what it means to learn, to remember what it looks like. And in my experience, it is about like 10 times easier to just memorize how a word looks if I already know what it sounds like and if I already know what it means. Because simply it is just less things that you have to learn a word. And the good part about this is what it sounds like and what it means, you can acquire that through immersion, right? For example, most of you guys watching this video already know what sounds like and what it means, because you've been exposed to it, through anime and just songs or like immersion, or just like Japanese content. So when you actually decide to, learn Japanese and start going through all these ANKI cards, the more words that you know what it sounds like and what it means, the more words that you will have an easier time remembering. Much, much, much easier time remembering. And that is like a core pillar as to why immersion is so important, right? Because it plants that seed. And when that seed is what it sounds like and what it means. That is literally what the seed is that is being planted and that you're trying to that will help you learn words. Okay. And then, but, I've been talking about these three things as like the pillar to learning a word, but I think there's more to that, right? And that is this third slide, where I've already introduced, these three pillars, but, I think there's more to it. And for example, when learning Japanese, I found that, an emotional connection was also a pillar. In fact, I think this might be even like the most important pillar as when it comes to learning a language or a word. Because I can speak English, Chinese, a little bit of Japanese, a little bit of like Spanish and a few other languages. But when I think, let's say like I'm speaking English to a friend, right? I will think in Chinese a lot of the time, just like naturally, because I have an emotional connection to certain Japanese words. For example, like let's say like a friend is showing me pictures of like the really cute cat or something. In my head, automatically, I would think, oh, 很可愛. Even though the conversation is fully in English, and it would just make more sense to just think, oh, that's cute, before I say the sentence, hey, that cat is really cute. I first think in Chinese, just instinctively, because maybe the very concept of cute was first introduced to me with Chinese. And perhaps that is why I have such an emotional connection to thinking and using 可愛 as opposed to cute. Even though I was born and raised in California, all of my friends, for the most part, speak English to me. But I still think in like other languages. So that is like one example of why like an emotional connection would be so important. The other thing is just having like an emotional connection, having a reason to learn a particular word will obviously help you learn that word, right? If you're learning words that you don't really care about / you don't really use / you don't really see yourself using, then like why would your brain actively remember that word, right? Obviously your brain will remember words that you like more, that you have more exposure to, that you have a reason and a want to learn. Second thing is when it comes to kanji. So this might be a foreign concept to English speakers or just anyone that didn't grow up with like Chinese and Japanese, maybe Korean. I'm not too sure about that part. But seeing images and words, like for example, when I look at this side of ski, this is the radical and primitive that means girl. And when I look at this word, or perhaps like when I look at a brand new word with this radical, I will already have a inkling of what the word means and a guess before I find out, right? And that's kind of how Japanese words and kanjis are kind of formed. Is there's a lot of like different parts that come together that create a word. Now sometimes it might just be completely unrelated, but seeing images and kind of like turning these pictures and understanding them as concepts could really help you learn Japanese. Another example would be ki, would be like, you might see this and you might think it kind of looks like, a tree, and these could kind of be branches, and you might see a bit of that in this character, and well, you'd be correct, because they love using this to describe words that are related to tree, like literally the word wood, right? Ki, just word wood. And then another thing would be how it's used, maybe like how it's used commonly or in a specific manner that stands out to you in terms of use case. And a personal anecdote of this would be my relationship to the word atsu. Because during my trip in Japan, it was like really hot during the summer months towards the end. And a lot of the like kind of, surface level conversations I would have with other people in the bar, or just, people that like shopkeepers, or, people that would help me find like directions. People that I would like ask like where do I go if I wanted to go, to a certain place, and they would help me out. A lot of the conversation would just be like, "Oh, 今日暑いですね. Ah, 暑いです." And yeah, and what that kind of translates to is just today's really hot, right? And they'd be like, "Yeah, it's so hot," and it's just like a very small thing that as like a conversation starter that everyone can like get behind, because it was really hot when I was in Japan. But when I was doing the ANKI cards, ATS came up, and I was like, I've never seen this word before. I have no idea what it means, as like my first impressions. And then when I flipped the card over and I learned what the definition was, atsu is the noun for hot. Atsi is the adjective for hot. And it just connected in my head that, oh, of course, atsu and atsi mean the same thing. Just, one's a noun and one's an adjective. But when I first saw the word, even though I was pronouncing it atsu, I was pronouncing it correctly, I just could not make that connection. Because although logically it makes sense, you don't really know when you should think about things logically and when you should think about these not logically. It takes a lot more resources if you look, if you think about every single thing super logically, because some things just aren't, and the things that aren't are gonna like, if you have like this logical mindset and you approach every single thing with a logical mindset, it will be really difficult to learn any kanji, for example. Because like I said, there are certain words that their primitives and radicals just don't make sense, So how it's used, right, could help you learn kanji or learn new words, right? Because atsu, once I made that connection that atsu and atsu are like the same. They mean the same thing. They're just, one's a noun, one's an adjective. I immediately learned atsu. I'm never going to not know that word, ever again. because I have such a strong connection with the word atsu, and atsu is just like the same thing. You just drop the e, right? It's not an e adjective. Just drop the e. And as you can see, I've kind of designed this slide in a certain way because this left side is logical appeal and the right side is emotional appeal, and that's how I those are like the two main categories that I look at new words, and I look at when it comes to like my relationship with learning Japanese. The logical appeal makes sense, but when it comes to like Japanese and Chinese as opposed to English, I think the emotional appeal matters so much more, just because of the amount of things that you would have to memorize, right? If you just memorize the alphabet, you can pronounce each word even though you've never seen it before. And you can kind of get what it means if like there's a certain part of the word, if it's like a conjunction, or if you've maybe heard it before. But with Chinese and Japanese, it is just different. You have to memorize every kanji and every word, and different kanji will be pronounced differently depending on what it's surrounded next to, the other hiragana or other kanji that it's next to form words. So having an emotional connection will help you think about the word first when you speak, because you don't want to be that guy, right, who's like, you're speaking Japanese but you have to come up with a sentence in English and then translate it in your head before you say the Japanese sentence, right, before you speak Japanese, because it would just be so slow, and it's just so annoying if that's how you have to like go through in your day-to-day life just to speak Japanese, right? I don't want that level of or that like low level of fluency. Like I just want to like speak Japanese, and I don't want to think about English whenever I'm speaking Japanese, right? And it's the same way when it comes to like Chinese. I grew up with Chinese. I speak Chinese to my family all the time, every day, and when I speak Chinese, I don't think about English, right? And that is the level of fluency that I want with Japanese. And that concludes the slides. And this is just a little bit about how I learn Japanese and my relationship to learning Japanese. And this might not be for everybody, but this is what works for me. And this is kind of like a part 1 to a 2-part series of learning Japanese. And of course, like the second part of this would be to go into today's ANKI words and show you what that process is, because this looks crazy, but I swear there is a method to the madness. And everything that will be in the second video will make more sense if you watch this one and you understand how I perceive language. Because I will be referencing like emotional connection, seeing images, how it's used, and the emotional appeal versus logical appeal when I go through today's ANKI words. And the second video won't really make sense if you don't watch this one, because the second video is basically just how I leverage these pillars of Japanese learning to my advantage when learning new words in practice, basically. I hope you guys found it interesting. If you have any questions, any other pillars that you would like to add, because I'm sure this is not all of them. This is just the main ones that I came up with that I think had the most impact with my Japanese learning. So feel free to leave any thoughts, comments, concerns in the comment section below. That's it. Thank you for watching.